I appreciate you taking your afternoon to come see this program. My name is Bruce Webb. I'm the Director of Aviation Education for Airbus. Have been in this capacity for about 2 years. So what I am interested in is education as opposed to training. So I look at training as learning to fly the helicopter. I'm not very interested in learning to fly the helicopter. I'm more interested in speaking to people about how we behave and educating people on how we can perhaps amend our behavior, or at least understand it more, so that we can put barriers in place to hopefully stop an accident from happening or an incident from happening. I've been flying helicopters like most people in this room, or I've been in aviation my whole life. I've been flying helicopters 36 years. I still do fly. I don't fly a whole lot. Last time I flew, for a whole lot was really with Charles down at Hurricane, whatever the hurricane was, in Houston. Not last year or year before? Last year. But I flew Sunday, but that was probably the last time I flew a lot. So I'm a roamer. So forgive me if that annoys you, but I'm not going to stand up there behind a podium. I'm going to walk around and talk. So this presentation, Hope is Not a Strategy. I'd like to take credit for the name, but really I plagiarized it. I used to say proudly, but now I don't say so proudly. But the fact is, I took that term from former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who in the 2008 Republican National Convention gave the opening speech. And in that presentation, he said the following: just as change is not a destination, neither is hope a strategy. Think about that a second. Just as change is not a destination, hope is not a strategy. And I think that's apropos for aviation. We don't want to make a change just so we can say, well, we changed something. And if you're going to make a change, your strategy for a successful change shouldn't be, I hope it goes well. I hope this works. But if we're honest with ourselves, there's not a person in this room who in your personal and professional life hasn't probably said to yourself, hope this works. Right? I hope the weather doesn't get worse. I hope that oil pressure doesn't go any lower. I hope that oil temp doesn't go any higher. Right? So we have to do a little less hoping and a little more planning. So I want to examine the human brain and the human mind, because they're two different things, actually, right? If right now we had a bone saw here and we had a cadaver, we could take the bone saw, cut the skull, pull the skull cap off, and we could each touch the brain. Yes, we could touch a cadaver's brain. Weighs about 3 pounds. Yeah. Do we all have a mind? Does everyone in this room have a mind? Can you touch a mind? No. Think about the brain being the hardware, your computer, the hardware, and your mind is the software that runs your brain. Your mind is a software that runs your brain. One without the other is no good. One without the other is no good. So we're going to talk about the brain. We're also going to talk about the mind. So, one of the tragedies in aviation has been that pilot error is a dirty word. It's a dirty phrase. Pilot error, oh my gosh, it was pilot error, and everyone shrieks from that. But here's the sad reality. Every pilot I've ever met is a human, and all humans make error. There's not one of you in the room today has not made an error today. It may have been a small error. It may have been a big error. But we make errors all the time. We are not going to stop error. And even by understanding how we make error does not indemnify you against making an error, unfortunately. It would be wonderful if we could say, well, you're trained up on this, so now you won't ever make that mistake. But that's no different. It's no more unreasonable than if I said, if I swing at you right now, you'll flinch. Okay? Now if I say, but don't flinch, I'm going to do it again. You still going to flinch? Sure you are. Right? But we have this perception that because we know we're educated, now we won't fall victim to it. Unfortunately, it's not true. But hopefully what happens through education is we can look at ways to mitigate that human response that reflects, whether it's mental or physical, to that stimuli. So we have to stop treating pilot error as a dirty word. We're all aviation professionals. I assume everyone in here is in the aviation business. And we're hopefully at the end of this presentation, we'll look and identify how we make shortcuts. Because humans, really the difficult thing in our lives is we're fighting 40, maybe 60,000 years of DNA is what we're fighting against. Right? Imagine this. If I could go back to the year 1000 AD, 1000 AD, and I could take a human, Homo sapien, and I could freeze that Homo sapien, and then I could resurrect them in the year 1500, 500 years later. What's changed in those 500 years? Not much. People are still traveling around in boats that are made of wood with sails, right? We're still killing animals and eating them, right? Let's move it 500 years to the right. Let's freeze the Homo sapien at the year 1500 AD, and let's wake him or her up in the year 2000 AD. What's changed? Oh my gosh, they would not recognize the world, would they? I mean, nothing is the same. Nothing is the same, except for one thing, their DNA. It's the same. We have, evolution certainly has not changed who we are over the past, we've been flying since 1903, right? No, we haven't evolved to be aviators in 170 years or whatever. We haven't. It'll take 17,000 years or so. I mean, it will take an enormous amount of time. So we're fighting against that. We're fighting against our primal behaviors. My children, who are 28 and 24, they still argue with me. I say, don't text and drive. You can't do two things at once. They're like, oh, Dad, come on. I'm like, you can't. You can't. So I believe I can prove that to you. We got a little game. It's not my original game. It's a game. Has anyone been to Dr. Chappelle's presentation? Anyway, he talks about Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for his book. Actually, the book is based on his paper, which won the Nobel Prize in Economics, called Thinking Fast and Slow. But Kahneman's got a little game that I'll play with you that I think will prove we don't multitask. Let's start with shortcuts. Humans are designed to take shortcuts. We're designed for that. The human mind says, I want to focus only the attention necessary on any one task because I need to have residual mental capacity for a threat unknown to me. It's interesting when you look at the human mind, your brain consumes 20% of your daily caloric intake. 20% of what you consume runs your brain. And whether it's being used vigorously, high gain, or not being used at all, low gain. And people say, well, that doesn't make sense. If I'm doing, algebraic equations all day, that has to take more energy than doing nothing all day. But the fact is, that's not true. Then there's various, ideas about why this exists. But the most popular one, most well-received one is that the human mind has to always be aware. Because you're here today because 40,000 years ago in your DNA, your forefathers, if they weren't aware, then the lion ate them, right? If you have a nice meal and then you're just laying back in the bushes and there's a lion over there and he attacks you, well, you didn't father any more children. So your brain is always consuming this energy. It's always consuming the energy. So it's always looking for shortcuts to retain energy. Always looking for shortcuts. So everyone in this room can read that passage. It says something like, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and the last letters be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. That's violating my principle, never read a slide. Can anyone not read that? Sure you can read it. Every person in this room can read that clearly. Do you have any doubt that I read it correctly? No. However, if I took, well, let me tell you a couple of things about this. Number one, it wasn't a Cambridge University study. That's a lie. Number two, it's also a lie that the first and the last letters have to be in the proper order. That's a lie as well. Thank God we have spell check, although I hate it on my phone because it's always, saying things I don't intend to say, or maybe I do subliminally. But we're not good spellers, but it doesn't matter. If I write an email to you and I butcher the spelling, you can still read it. You know what it says. You think I'm an illiterate, but you can still read it because you're not reading each individual letter. Maybe your wife is, right? Women seem to be more attuned to that than men, but I don't care. As long as a message, if you sent me that email and it was an important email, I would know exactly what you meant. So would everyone in this room. We're always looking for shortcuts. And once you've learned something, once your mind has learned, it can't unlearn. You could walk out of this room right now and come back a year later and see me, and you're going to recognize me. You've learned what I look like. You know me now, right? You can't erase me from your memory. Well, I suppose, maybe a baseball bat to the head might remove the memory, but watch this. Watch this video. Has anyone seen this before? Good. Stop it right there. What is it? Say it. It's a cigar stuck in a brick wall. Take a cigar, puff on it a few times, stick it in the mortar. Take a picture. It's a cigar. Can everyone see that it's a cigar stuck in a wall? Now, 90 seconds ago, or when it first started, could you see it? Okay? You could. You saw it immediately. Oh, I wasn't challenging you. I was just curious if that's the case because that's unique and I'm interested in. So there's a cigar stuck in a wall. 90 seconds ago now, you didn't see it, right? Try to unsee it now. Try to go back to where you were now 2 minutes ago where you didn't see it because you can't. You can't look at that now and not see the cigar. It's plain as the day it's plain as the nose in your face. You've learned, your mind learned. There's many of these. You can take, there's inverse images. There's a lot of these, not tricks, but they show us that once you've learned something, it's there. It's interesting. Now the next few slides, I'm not tricking you. And some of these you're going to get right away, right? Super. Mary's mother has 4 children, April, May, June, and Mary. But what's the quick intuitive answer? Somebody in this room absolutely wanted to say, because what we all want to say is, I tell you what, if we do this after a couple drinks, everyone's going to say July, right? And by the way, if you are super pressed for time, you might say July as well. How about this one? What's that sign say? Now I'm tricking you, so of course you're going to be hyper vigilant. But what it says, what you think it says is think you can't be fooled. But it says think you can't be fooled. Used there twice. But if we weren't in an environment where I was posing that as a challenge to your observation skills, you'd just say think you can't be fooled. Of course you would. Absolutely. Every one of us would. And when I do this in very large groups, there's always someone who's seen them all and knows the answers. So for them, I have this one. Oh, I'm sorry. This one's the one I use for them. Solve this problem quickly. If you've never seen it before, a bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. What's the ball cost? You got 2 seconds. 1, 0, answer. Come on. Everyone wants to say a dime. The only reason you're not saying a dime is I'm trying to trick you. I'm not really tricking you though, right? I'm not tricking you. I'm not. And again, if we weren't in this environment, you'd all be saying a dime, because that's the quick, intuitive answer. Right? We do a lot intuitively. We do a lot based upon Kahneman would call it System 1. I say it really derives, although he's a hell of a lot smarter than me, but it derives from within your limbic system. You have two structures called the amygdala. We'll talk about those later. But really, what it costs is a nickel. Because if it costs $1 more and they both combine to cost that, it has to be a nickel. Otherwise, it would be $1.20. It has to be a nickel. It's easy. The math's easy. Which does, we'll talk a little bit about later, but I'll give you a preemptive look. You know, when we want to make a decision, we have to have information, not too much and not too little. We have to have time to make that. If I gave you an hour to work this out, no one would get it wrong, right? And you have to be in the proper environment to make that decision. If I put you underwater with no oxygen, right, yeah, you're probably not going to come up with a nickel very quickly. Right? Let me go back real quick to the Stroop Effect. Has anyone heard of the Stroop Effect? It's fascinating as well. So let's take this top the 6 words in the top 6 words. And what I want you to do is, I don't want you to read the word, I just want you to tell me the color. So let's do it, this is class participation time. The color, green, red, blue, purple, blue, purple. A little faster this time. Green, red, blue, purple, blue, purple. Not bad, right? Let's do the second set. I only want to hear you say the color. Go. Now, let's start over. Let's do that again. Louder and in unison. I'll start you out. Red. Yeah. Right? Now, there's a couple of reasons this happens. It's because of interference. Everyone in this room is literate. Everyone in this room is literate. You can read. And because you can read, reading is interfering with reading, seeing the color, saying the color. You're used to looking at a word and speaking the word, not speaking the color. It's interference theory. In this case, relevant information, all I want's the color, has to be separated from the word, and you can't do it. Not quickly. And in fact, it's interesting, if I challenged you, if I said, hey, listen, next year, wherever this is going to be, we're going to come back and we're going to do this again. I'm not going to give you the same 6 set of words, but we're going to do it again. Does anyone in this room believe you can ever do the second set as fast as the first set? I'm not saying you can't do it faster than you're doing it now. I'm asking, do you ever believe you can do the second set as fast as the first set? Nope, not a chance. Not a chance. You can practice until the cows come home. Who can do this? Colorblind people, potentially, depends upon what your color blindness is. Potentially, yes. Good answer. Children, illiterates. If you can't read, you got no interference. By the way, think of this. If you right now don't look down at whatever document you have in front of you, if I asked you to bet your life on the color of the words printed on the document, you're going to bet your life. Would you do it? No. Why? Because you don't pay attention to the color of a document print. You don't care if it's black, blue, red, purple, honestly. As long as it is contrasting and you can see it, you don't pay attention. You just read it. Do this one day, though. Spell a word and use a different color for every letter in the word. So take that Cambridge University thing that's not real, but make the first letter in a word red, the next one yellow, green, purple, blue, purple, yellow, red, green, purple. Now read it. Very difficult. Very difficult. We do use emboldened words. We use colors, right? Red means something emergent, right? We use bold. We'll highlight things in bold to say these are memory items. But at the end of the day, the color is really not so important to us. It's not. Yeah, I find these things fascinating. So, now, you've seen this before. Everyone in this room has seen this or something similar, but I'm just going to ask you to participate. Most will, some won't, that's okay. So you're going to be asked to count, okay? Now, for those that have seen it before, I have another one for you, right? So play along.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
So people have done this, you've seen something like this before, but count the passes.
The answer is 13.
Right, so how many people got 13? Raise your hand if you got 13. Excellent. How many people got between 12 and 14? Excellent. How many people didn't count? Truthful, I like that. Because if you've seen it before, there's no reason to really count, right? So, to be honest, if you're going to do this in a research program, if you're more than one standard deviation off of 13, and I don't know what the standard deviation is in this case, I just use one, pulling it out of my ear, you're excused from the research, right? Because if you're more than one standard deviation off in this case, you weren't paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, inattentional blindness and change blindness, we can't discern that. But for the people, who has not seen this before? Okay, a few people. How many have not seen it got 13, or between 12 and 14? Excellent. And of those people, how many people saw the gorilla? You guys didn't see the gorilla? All right, so one did. So one person who hasn't seen it, who got the right number, didn't see the gorilla. And so we're going to continue to play it, and you'll see the gorilla, of course.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Bear. That's why you didn't say gorilla, it's a bear. Go! So while you're concentrating on the white team passing the ball, on the right-hand side comes a bear, does a little moonwalk, and leaves. Yeah, you're not going to see what you're not looking for. And I tell you a good example in an EC 135, and we see this in simulator training in an EC 135. If you have an engine oil temperature go out of range on an EC 135, not an H, but an EC 135, what happens is the data block, the segment for oil temperature, when it goes out of range and goes into the yellow, the whole field is highlighted in yellow, and then when it goes into the red, the whole field's highlighted in red, and then it flashes. Okay? That's what happens to the engine oil temperature. You don't get a caution flash, you've got the oil temperature flashing, because it's a warning, it's a caution, not a warning. It's a caution, not a warning. Okay? So when we do simulator training, it's very easy to take people, and because we're doing training, not check rides. So if we're going to go fly, I'll say, oh, Raphael, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an engine failure, a tail rotor failure, a hydraulic failure. We're going to do some OEI work. We're going to do an auto rotation. We're going to do an ILS. I'll tell you everything we're going to do. And then we go through the checklist and we make sure you know exactly how to handle every emergency, because I'm not trying to trick you. I'm trying to train you, help you. And one of those things we'll talk about is engine oil temperature exceedance. And I'm telling you, I'm going to give you one of those. We go do the flight. It's about a 90-minute flight. What percentage of the people do you think never notice the engine oil temperature out of range? About 70%. 7 out of 10 pilots don't see it. And it's not hard to imagine how. So let's think you're out flying a helicopter, and my number one engine has a chip. You shut the number one. It doesn't matter why you shut the number one engine down, but I give you something, because I'm going to give you an engine failure, and I told you I was. I failed the number one engine. You shut it down, you secure the engine, yada, 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 and now you're flying on the second engine, the remaining engine. Has your cognitive load gone up, the strain? Sure. Now, you're on an IFR flight plan, you're IMC, you're flying with the autopilot, but still the cognitive load is higher, the strain is higher. And so, I give you a vector to the localizer, and you've got an intercept to the localizer, and you're running through the pre-landing check, and we get the final approach fix, and I say, configured for landing, you're ready to land? You're like, yep. Wow, okay. Did you notice your engine oil? I don't usually say that. What I usually ask is, are you sure? Which is code for right? And then honestly, I'll bet 20% of the people after that don't notice. In fact, you'll say, pressures and temperatures okay? Most get it then, but not everyone even. You don't see what you're not looking for. You're not expecting it. You look right at it, but you don't see it. A little trick there is, use your hand. Touch. Don't touch. We don't want to smudging up the screens. But place your hand where you're supposed to be looking. If you want to look at fuel and you want to give me the fuel quantity, take your hand and put your finger down there and then read it with your finger there. You're much more likely to give the accurate value. Much more likely. So let's play the second one. So a few people didn't see the gorilla, and that's normal. Or the bear. That was a bear. Okay, let's do another one. Now it's clear what's happening here, right? This is a similar one. I'm going to ask you to play and count.
The monkey business illusion.
Most people aren't going to count.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
But humor me and count. Okay. So the answer was 16 passes. No one was counting, even if I asked you to count. And everyone saw the whatever it was. Go ahead, Charles. Oh, were you? Good man. And you still saw it? I saw it right in the middle. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Well, you're still within the, we'll call that okay. You get a pass on that. So you know, I mean, I'm not trying to trick you, but you know there's an object that's going to pass the screen, and you all saw the object. What else changed? Say that again a little louder. The background was brighter, yep. Is that the only thing different? Well, so you're on the right. Yes, the background started red, ended gold. I'm going to play it through fruition again. So the background started red and ended gold. The whole time they were passing the ball, the background was changing color. It'll be clear as a bell. And what else happened? Because there's another change, and you should have seen it because you weren't counting, except for Charles. Right? What else happened? See if you can catch it this time. I'll tell you, but let's see if you can catch it. Let's see, I want to make sure it doesn't, I want to go back here.
The monkey business illusion.
I'm going to see if you catch it. Now, clearly, you're watching for
Count
it
how
now.
many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
So notice it's red, the background red. And you're right, sir, it is much brighter. But still, yeah. What else changed? Pardon me? Yeah, black lady. When the gorilla came on, she left. There were only 2 black girls dressed in black passing the ball. But we don't notice. We're not looking. Interestingly enough as well, when they did this in both of these videos, from which side of the screen did the object that we didn't see come from? The right. And it left to the left. It left to the left, Bruce. Wow, that's bad grammar. It departed to the left. Was that an accident? Go to a play. Actors come on and off. Where? On from here, off to here. Why? Because you don't notice that. You're less likely to notice that. Things moving across your field from left to right will be seen more than right to left. We read left to right. Fascinating. It's those little things we just don't realize, right? But when you do these experiments, you soon realize. So you're exactly right. This is a game, and this is where we get to participate again. I'm going to put a disclaimer out there that say you can't sue Airbus if you fall down. You won't fall, I don't think. But we're going to play a game together. It's called Plus One. The game is incredibly easy. What is 1 plus 1? 7 plus 1? 10 plus 1? Can anyone not come up with those same sums? Everyone can, yes? So we can play this game. It's easy. So I'm going to put it up on the screen to make it crystal clear to everyone. I'm going to give you 4 sets of numbers. And I'm going to ask you to add 1 to each digit and continue on. So the first set of numbers is 4726. 4726. The next set is 5837. Does that make sense? What's next? 6948. Yes? 6948. Easy, yes? Okay, perfect. Let's play together now. I'm just going to pull 4 numbers out of my ear again. 4962. 4962. Let's do it together. 4962. Let's go. Keep going. 5, 10, 7, 3. Let's start again. This didn't work. I didn't say it clearly enough. 4 digits. Give me a digit. Another one. Another one. Another one. 3684. Let's go. Next. Don't write them down. Easy, isn't it? This is really designed to be done while walking. And I was joking about the falling down. You guys did so great. I'm not going to ask you, but here's what I do. In a lot of cases, honestly, it's difficult to do just sitting here comfortably, right? Everyone's sitting here comfortably. No one is under cognitive strain. You're not under threat. You're not in an IMC environment with an engine on fire and, running out of gas. Everyone here has almost 0 cognitive load right now. You're enjoying yourself, hopefully. Yet you can't do this. You can't stay in the present, move to the future, hold the future, move to the future. Because that's what it takes. It takes present now, move future, move present, which is now past, to present, and then look to future again. And then move what is now future into present and move future again. You can't do it. But we think we can fly along in a helicopter, right, at 3 miles a minute, 2 miles a minute for every helicopter made, 3 miles a minute for some nice ones. And we think we're going to be able to calculate, the tailwind for the winds aloft between 6 and 9, with a 20-degree cut or a 30-degree cut and a 20-knot tailwind difference. No, you can't do that. You can't. You think you can, but you can't. Hopefully that proves you can't. We don't have that excess ability. And so what I have people do, people that think, well, that's just BS, I have them get up and stand on 1 foot. What's that do to your cognitive strain? We can all stand on 1 foot, but it increases your strain. It's harder. So what do you imagine happens? And do this with a loved one that has a good sense of humor, and go walk with them and say, hey, sweetie, I want to play a game with you. It's called Plus One. And just do it just like that and walk. What do you think they do by the second iteration? Yeah, punch you? Yeah. For you, that's probably deserved. No. What do you think they do? Stop. Actually, when you start the game, you say 7249. 7249. And they go, immediately they slow down. Immediately they slow their pace. And by the second iteration, you tell me if they're not stopped. You email me and say, Bruce, nope, promise you, she wasn't stopped or he wasn't stopped. They're stopped. We have to realize our minds have limitations. Think of this. If I asked everyone in this room, hey, listen, here's the deal. Airbus has this is fantasy. This is fantasy. We have a new H-160 outside, and we're going to give it to you guys. Everyone gets one if you can run a 10-minute mile. This is fantasy. So I've got 50 of them sitting out here. Everyone who can run a 10-minute mile gets an H-160, brand new, with training. Who here can't run a 10-minute mile for a $20 million helicopter, whatever they cost? Every one of us is going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to lower it to 9 minutes. A couple people might not make it. Most will. 8, 7. Let me tell you, if I get to the probably 5-minute marks, I would bet a lot of money no one's running a 6-minute mile, but there might be someone that surprises me, you know. If you put a gun to my head, I might be able to click off a 7. Maybe. I normally run 8s, but 1 mile for a 160, maybe I could do it. Probably not. If I said 4-minute miles, would anyone even try? You wouldn't even go out there. You'd say, I can't do that. But think about this. When you're flying along and you have all these mental tasks to complete, right? So maybe you're IMC, you're in and out, you've gotten traffic report, traffic, you're trying to find them because when you're VMC and IFR clearance, you still have to look out, right? It's still your responsibility to see and avoid. So it's not hard to imagine a lot of tasks that'll get your mental strain high. And once it reaches a certain point, anything else that's added, guess what? It's not accepted as data that you're going to do anything with. We'll continue. I think we've got some really good examples. So again, I say you can do it standing on one foot. We're not going to do that. And by the way, a little mental trick, although Charles over here is writing it down. That's a good trick. I didn't tell you not to write it down. I don't want you to write it down. Of course, anyone can write it down and add one. But here is a good mental trick. Try to visualize it. Try to visualize it. I put the numbers up on the screen. When you choose the numbers, when someone chooses the numbers, try to see them. Try to mentally see them. It does improve the opportunity for you to be successful. Okay. So we must accept our minds. Our minds, actually I should put in there, it's our brain and our mind are physical limitations. They are a physical limitation. Just like you can't run a 4-minute mile, you can't tell me what 7,412 times 2 divided by 8 is. Now, if I give you enough time, you'll come to the conclusion. But you can't right now. The brain's going to find a shortcut, and once it's found it, it's going to keep it. That's why checklists are so important. And I believe this, my observation is this. Checklists are much more valuable than simply the words on the page. In fact, I could argue, I think successfully, if we wanted to have a debate, that the most important thing about most checklists is not the words, but the fact that it slows you down. If you really are using a checklist, you're not nearly as likely to shut down the remaining engine. When you have an engine failure in a twin, shutting down the good engine is usually a bad thing. That's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. And so when we look at a checklist, so all manufacturers, Leonardo, Sikorsky, Bell, Airbus, we all, in every aircraft, in the pilot's operating handbook, in the flight manual, we present to you a checklist, yes? It's our belief, our understanding of the best way to run through, whether it's normal procedures or emergency procedures for that aircraft. It's what we believe is best. There's nothing in the law, whether you're Part 135, 121, or 91, that stops you from taking our checklist and making one that's customized for you. And what I mean is, if you buy, here's a great example. Does anyone here fly 135s, 145s? I know EC 135s, 145s. Here's an interesting thing about the aircraft. It's sold in this country only with an autopilot. Only with an autopilot, except for the E models, and that's a different story. But in this country, all of them have an autopilot. But that's not standard in the airframe. Standard in the airframe is no autopilot, which means in the normal checklist on a 135 in Section 4, there's no autopilot checks in it because that's not part of the TC base aircraft. The flight manual supplement in the back has the checklist for the autopilot. And you say, well, who cares about that, Bruce? Well, it's fascinating. So I'll go fly with somebody, right? Hey, let's go fly. You know, whatever happens, happens. And I'm going to go fly with you. And I say, listen, just do whatever you're going to do. Don't try to impress me by, being checklist Charlie. Or you just do whatever it is you're really going to do. Of course, no one ever does that, right? They pull out the checklist. First thing they do is they blow the dust off of it. First thing they actually have to do is find it. First, they got to find it. Then they got to wipe the dust off of it. Then they got to start using it. And it's pretty clear very quickly that they don't use a checklist because they'll go through the whole checklist and never test the autopilot. Why? Because it's not in that checklist. If you don't take the supplement and put it in with the checklist or make your own, it's not there. It does no good to have a checklist you don't use. I will tell you, every manufacturer would agree. No one's going to disagree when I say it's better to have your own checklist that you follow than ours that we believe is the best, and you don't follow it. If you're not using it, it has no value. Use a checklist. And so the second part of my story or my belief there is that really it's not so much the words on the page. So let's just take a single-engine helicopter. Now, of course, people say, yeah, Bruce, but in a single-engine helicopter, the checklist says to put the collective down when your engine fails. Really, who here flies? Who here's a pilot, helicopter pilot? Several. Okay, great. You're flying along a single-engine helicopter. I'm going to slap this table, so don't. So let's imagine you're flying a helicopter tonight. We're going from DFW to Grand Prairie, and we're going to go pick up that 160 you just won in the race. And in the back of the helicopter, I do this. I will bet everything I own that every helicopter pilot in this room goes down with the collective at least that far. At least that far. Did he use a checklist for that? No. My point is, those things that are so important, so visceral, so ingrained, you're not using a checklist for anyway. You're going to check down with the collective, just like you're going to flinch. What gets us in trouble is it's not those visceral things we just have to take an action. If you're hovering, I don't care what ship you're hovering. It can have 5 engines or 1 engine. If the engine quits, you're not pulling out the engine failure in a hover checklist. What you're going to do is you're going to find yourself on the ground and you're going to go, what happened? Let's be honest, that's what's going to happen. Right? That's why I say it's not that important. You know, hovering auto rotations, we call them that. They're really not hovering auto rotations because you're never in auto rotation. They're engine failures in a hover. Right? That's what they are. I say we still train them and we will continue to train them, but I say it's really kind of a maneuver that doesn't need to be trained for this reason. If you fly the helicopter at the speed of a brisk walk or slower, always over terrain that you can safely land the aircraft, what does it matter if you know how to do a hovering auto? When the engine quits, you're just going to land. Right? The key is hovering it in a safe manner over a surface you can land on. If you don't do that, you can be the best damn guy at a hovering auto there is, but it ain't going to matter. Go do a hovering auto over a swamp full of alligators and find out how that turns out. Right? It will be bad. It will be bad. So when we look at a checklist, and let's talk about something that's a more benign. You're flying along and you have a generator failure. You have a generator failure. Fine. Is there anything about a generator failure that requires a pilot to take an action in the next 2 minutes? Very likely not. I mean, if the aircraft's otherwise airworthy. So my point behind it is, if you have a checklist and you're really using a checklist, it slows you down. Not in this presentation, but others that I teach. I tell people, when you have an engine failure in a twin, the first thing to do is take a very deep breath. And that's also the second and the third thing to do. Then the fourth thing to do is get the checklist and start running the checklist. You're going to survive a lot longer than the person who thinks he's Tom Cruise and is going to start flipping switches and rotating throttles and doing all this stuff, because you will get your butt in a crack quicker than you can blink. And once you're in that, you're not getting back out. We talked about the Stroop Effect and multitasking. Multitasking, it's fiction. So let's talk about some terms that aren't necessarily aviation. You're probably familiar with many of them. Some not, but that's not so important. But the limbic system, we'll talk about the limbic system within the brain, the neocortex, gain frames and loss frames, hugely important, and the hippocampus and the amygdala. So let's start out with just how we define the goodness of a decision. And if you're in one of my other presentations, I can't remember if I did it both times or not, but I did something kind of similar to this. Not really, but the outcome of a decision cannot be used to judge the goodness of a decision. It just can't. It can't. So let's just go through this and we'll talk about, so if I make a good decision, so the weather's good and someone wants me to go from point A to point B and the ship's otherwise airworthy and I'm awake, alert, and oriented and I've got, all the medical, I'm good to go, and I take off and I fly and I get to the destination and I land safely. Was that a good decision? Sure it was. Did it turn out good? Sure did. Good. Right, we all know that's good. Let's make a good decision that turns out bad. All those things that I just said are true, but en route to point B, there is a huge dust storm. If you fly out in the southwest, like in Phoenix, you'll see these sometimes. It's just a wall of dust. And if you have the misfortune of flying through that just after the rain shower that sometimes precedes it, it's a wall of mud. When it gets on you, it's mud. So I can make a good decision to take the flight. Inexplicably, the winds pick up, the humidity level in the air is low enough, sufficiently low, that the dust rises and I've got a dust storm. So I don't make my destination. Was my decision good or bad? Well, I say it was a good decision. It just turned out bad, right? But other people would argue, well, no, it was a bad decision because it turned out bad. I don't know that I believe that. Let's make a bad decision. It turns out good. Unfortunately, this is the one that kills us because it emboldens us. I'm like, well, the weather's a little skosh, but you know what? I'm awfully good, right? Because the past 7 times I flew in bad weather, I came back unscathed. These other people that are crashing in bad weather, they're just not so good. I can do it. I can do it. So I take off in the bad weather and I make it. I go to point B and I land. Was my decision good or bad? It was absolutely a horrible decision. A lot of people say it was a good one, though, because I made it. Because what happens is, because of how your brain is set up, your amygdala takes these visceral responses and it tags them. So if I make a bad decision but it turns out good, I can either look at it 2 ways. I can either look at it and say, bad decision turned out good. You are the luckiest SOB that ever drew a breath. Or I can look at it and say, I'm good. And how you emotionally attach that memory in your amygdala, in your limbic system, through your amygdala, makes a difference on what you're going to do next time. Think about what experience is. Experience is past events, right, that we've used to become experts. Because what is an expert? An expert is someone with a lot of experience. But that's really BS. It only works in a couple of situations. A great deal of experience only makes you an expert in something if what you're doing with that vast experience was repeatable and you got good feedback for it. Think of this. Is weather repeatable? Is most weather repeatable? Is the weather you see today the weather that's going to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next day? No, it's ever changing. So you might fly in bad weather today and get away with it, and it may happen tomorrow, and it may happen the next day and the next day and the next day. And so you think you're an expert in the ability to dodge and scud run and keep out of that weather. But the fact is you're not. You're fooling yourself. You're not an expert. You're setting yourself up for failure. That's why when we see, how many times have you seen a helicopter accident where the headline is, 10,000-hour helicopter pilot dies in accident. No one can understand how such an experienced person could make such a dumb mistake. That's how. Just because you have 10,000 hours does not mean you are an expert. It may mean you are experienced. It doesn't make you an expert. I would venture to say we all know a pilot with 10,000 hours, or whatever you want to define. I hate that as a definition of competency, but that's what the industry standard is. We all know a pilot with 10,000 hours you wouldn't let drive your car. And we also know pilots with 500 hours you'd let them fly your mom and dad around. Right? I pose that if you're a great pilot at 10,000 hours, I bet if I went back in your life at 500 hours, you're a great pilot as well. And if you have the fortune to live to be 10,000-hour pilot, but you're bad, you're probably a bad pilot at 500 hours too. You just haven't had the misfortune for those Swiss cheese holes to line up and terminate you. And a bad decision may turn out bad. A bad decision may turn out bad, right? These are obvious ones, yeah? Well, why did the idiot take off? He took off in 0-0 conditions and crashed a mile from the runway. Well, that was obviously bad, and everyone agrees he's bad, yes? So we can all agree on all of this. Here's the problem. Let's look at hero and fool. If you're in my previous presentation, I touched on this, but not to this degree. Let's imagine I'm flying, it doesn't matter what I'm flying, but I'm just going to use helicopter air ambulance as a great example. I'm flying a helicopter air ambulance. I know it's difficult to read, I apologize. I don't really want you reading it anyway. I don't know why I put the slide up. I'm flying a helicopter air ambulance, and a call comes in to go to point A and pick up a patient and take him to point B. Super. So let's imagine what I do is I've checked the weather. The weather, my minimums are 1,003, and the weather is 501. So I check the weather. I go and check the METARs and make sure the weather's still below 1,003 along my flight path, or is forecasted not be above that, right? And I say I can't go. I just turn it down. Can't go. Hold that in your mind. If instead I take the flight, and I don't make my destination. I don't crash. But it's that same scenario. Maybe the weather's 802 instead of 1,003, but it's forecast to trend better over the next 2 hours. Now, my flight's only 30 minutes long, so that really doesn't matter to me. But I say, you know what? I'm good, right? I'm good. I can do it. And so I take off. And I land in a soccer field 10 miles from my departure point, and I turn back to the crew and say, man, I'm sorry, I tried. Which pilot do you believe everyone in that industry, everyone involved is going to say is the better pilot? Be honest. It's the second one. It's not the first one. The first pilot that turned it down, a lot of people are going to say, that guy's just lazy. He didn't even try. What effort was that? People like the second guy. That's why we have the problems that we have in our industry. Because trying gets an attaboy. And if it's not an overt attaboy, it's certainly subliminal, right? The medical crews, they love you. He tried, right? They know you. They know you're a good pilot. And by the way, you try. But let's change it to something a little more realistic. You take it, but you have an incident or an accident. Let's just make it an incident. I land in the soccer field and I hit the freaking net and chew up the tail rotor. Now what am I? Well, I'm not as good as I was 2 minutes ago. What's the difference really, though? What's the difference? What's the difference between the flight that I land in the soccer field and I do no damage, I'm unscathed, and I land in the soccer field and there's a net that's untended and it gets tangled in my rotor system and does $1 million damage, which would be a little bit of damage. What's the difference in actuality? Luck, fortune. It's not skill. It's nothing. It's luck. But we say, in this case, the pilot was, he's a good pilot. In this case, gosh, boy, Bruce, he really screwed up. What was he thinking? If I make that flight, depending upon how important that flight is to someone, I might be considered a hero. If the flight is to pick up, the medical director's wife from a car accident and take her to the level 1 trauma center, and I do it and she survives, and I did it below minima, do you think anyone's going to spank me for that? Nope. I will get a plaque in the freaking hospital for that. I shouldn't, should I? No. I made a bad decision. It turned out good, but it was still a bad decision. We got to separate the two. And I use drunk driving as the best example of that's easily understood and visceral. If after this event you take me out and you say, hey, Bruce, man, I want to buy you a beer, and I drink 8 instead of 1 because I'm an alcoholic. I'm not, but this. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll see. I'm driving home. And I drive home, and I arrive home unscathed. I don't hurt anyone. I don't cause an accident. I'm involved in an accident. Was my decision to drive home a good one? Nope. Horrible decision. Was the outcome good? Perfect outcome. Let's flip it. I say, you take me out, I drink those 8 beers or whatever I said, and you say, Bruce, you're too drunk to drive home. You only had ice water. And you say, let me drive you home. And I say, yeah, you're right. I give you the keys to my car. And you drive me home. And as you're driving me home, through no fault of your own, you're the most safe driver in the world. We're T-boned by someone, probably a drunk driver, and I am killed instantly. Instantly. Was my decision to have you drive me home the right decision? Yes, it was. Was the outcome bad? Yes, it was, for me. We've got to separate the two. If we're going to link our decisions with the outcome, we're going to have a whole lot of people, because do you think the person who scud run and got his butt in a crack and had an accident, that was the first time he did it or she did it? No. No. The odds of that being the first time you did it, you got dead, pretty small. It was learned behavior. Right? Intentional noncompliance. And people say, yeah, we got to stop those people that are intentionally noncompliant. Those people, we need to terminate them, and they got to stop it. And you know what? That's all fine to say, but the better way to say it is, we have to stop it. Because you know what? In this room right now are people, you have all been intentionally non-compliant, I'll bet, in this conference. And I'll just use a great example from Airbus. I use my own personal computer. I don't bring Airbus's computer. Because if I log on to the Wi-Fi system here, I violated Airbus policy. I cannot log on to an unsecured network. And I'll bet you many people in this room have their companies have those same policies, but they log on anyway. What's that called again? Intentional non-compliance. You can't say it's wrong for the pilot to do it when other people are doing it in a similar way. With potentially, people say, yeah, but that's not killing people. Really? Let's forget about lives for a second. Let's look at cost. What if the Chinese get into your computer system and cause the State Department to come take your entire system? I think people would be awfully upset with you. But those things happen. It's human behavior again. My faux pas, my malfeasance, it's just a little thing. It's not a big deal. I'm only flying 100 feet below minima. Think about this as well. When we're out there flying in bad weather, let's imagine I'm flying, and most of you don't fly right here, but if you did fly right here, you would know, and this is anywhere in the country, probably the world. If you're going to do an IFR approach, a non-precision approach to most places in the world, they'll drop you off above 300 feet AGL. Grand Prairie's approach drops me off at 411 feet AGL. Okay? If I'm going to fly a helicopter in this country, VFR, in Part 135, I'm going to be an air taxi helicopter flying passengers for hire. From this hotel to DFW tonight, I could get op specs to fly with a 300-foot ceiling and a mile visibility. If you're flying a 225 or a Citation 10 into Grand Prairie tonight, you can't make the approach because you can't get in. The weather's too bad. But I can be in a helicopter bebopping around out there, VFR. Does anyone want to ride with me in 301 at night? I don't want to ride with me. But it's legal. Our prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain up here, this is what makes us a human. This is what makes you, not you, right? It makes us individuals. It makes us, individuals. It's our rational brain. It's where we, with sufficient time, it's where we reason, solve problems, and have impulse control. But the problem with our prefrontal cortex is it takes time. That's why you quickly couldn't tell me a nickel. And in fact, the only reason no one shouted out a dime is because you're in this environment. If you're at your kids' or your grandchildren or your child's math class, and the teacher's like, okay, this is a problem for Sally, and she didn't do so good, and she didn't get it right, you'd be like, what's a dime? Right? You'd be wrong, but that's what you'd say. Okay? Because the prefrontal cortex takes time to solve problems. What's the one thing most of us don't have in aircraft? Time. When things go wrong, we don't have time. We don't have time. We must take an action fairly quickly. I'm proud to say I did this very same presentation at Mayo Clinic twice. Once to the flight team, 156 pilots, nurses, medics, and drivers, and once to the anesthesiology department. Because they thought, you know what? That has applicability in the surgery suites as well, because in surgery, much like in a cockpit, there's no time to be diddling around thinking. We have to take action, and we need checklists, and they were interested in how we display things. Imagine that. I'm a farm kid from Illinois that flies helicopters, and but it is true. Any environment where time is of the essence, aviation has a lot of solutions. We're used to these issues. We're not always mastering them, but we're used to them. So if I give you enough time, you can take any problem. I don't care what the problem is. Train A is doing 200 knots and train B is doing 300 knots, and they leave the station. When are they going to hit? You can solve all those problems. But you can't do it intuitively, and you can't do it quickly. You can't. So it's not, and we need an environment to do it. We need a safe, comfortable place to do it. And what, again, is not a cockpit. It's not comfortable. Even the most comfortable ships aren't something, you're not taking, well, you might take a nap. You shouldn't be taking a nap. I'm kidding now. But no one here has done their income tax while flying the dead leg on a flight in a helicopter. You haven't said, well, I got nothing to do, I'll just do my taxes. Right? You can't. It's not a good place to do it. It's too hot, it's too cold. It's damp, it vibrates. Even the smooth ones vibrate a little, right? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that's not a great place to do your income taxes. So you wouldn't do something like your income tax while flying, but you'll make decisions that people's lives are predicated upon. We think nothing of that. Where we make most of our decisions, and Kahneman would call this system 1. It's your amygdala. 2 little structures the size of an almond, embedded just in your limbic system, below the parietal lobe, between the temporal lobes. And it's where we take visceral information and we attach that and form a memory. And so if I form a memory, like my example before, if I scud run and make it, well, the memory is, I'm all that in a bag of chips. But if instead I look at it like, oh my gosh, I'm sick to my stomach, right? If you haven't, I shouldn't say it that way. I believe most of us have had that pit in our stomach, which is from having adrenaline, right? Your adrenal gland is just flowing adrenaline into your system because it is scared for its life, right? Your adrenal gland knows you're almost going to get dead, right? It doesn't really care about any other part. It cares about the adrenal gland. Being silly, but you get that pit in your stomach because you know you're in over your head. And when you escape that, if you say, oh my gosh, I am lucky to be alive, then good for you. But if you escape that and say, I'm excellent, look what I've done, you're fixing to get hurt one day. Kind of interesting to me. So, it's where we make these visceral, quick decisions, emotional decisions. And here's a good example in a life, just in our lives. I'm certain if you have a spouse or a child, or we all have mothers and fathers, or you couldn't be here. Let's imagine you go home. Typically it's a spouse, but you go home and your wife just shows you the $700 pair of shoes she bought, right? That look like, you're like, well, that weighs 4 ounces. Those things are $400 an ounce, whatever. I can't do the math. And so naturally, because you've been working all day and you're tired and you haven't eaten, you say to yourself, you know what? Why don't I'm just going to defer this conversation to the weekend when we can talk about it rationally, right? That's what you do, isn't it? No, of course not. You say, what the hell are those? She says, well, those are my new shoes, honey. Aren't they great? Look at them. They're so beautiful. And you say, well, $700, really? But I got them on sale. They were $1,000. I saved you $300. No, right? But still, so you've taken the step, but now you recognize she's like, well, you just bought that new motorcycle for $20,000. I can't have $700 shoes? And now you recognize you're in over your head, so you just stop, right? You say, oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. No, you don't, right? And before you know it, it's 11 o'clock at night, and someone's furious, probably both people, right? Because you do things with emotion, not with reason. Most of what we do is not through reason, it's through emotion. And in the cockpit, that happens all the time. We don't base decisions on we'd like to think that we are, right? We watch Top Gun and see what Goose and Maverick are doing, right? No, we're not doing that. Checklists help us do that. And if we conform to those, we have a far better chance of a good outcome. But too often we think we know best. It'll be fine, right? That oil pressure gauge, that can't be. There's no way I've had a double gearbox pressure failure. No way that can happen. The odds are 10 to the negative 9. It can happen, right? Things happen. It's not for you to decide that, well, I'm smarter than the people that built this, and I'm smarter than everyone who sat down in a comfy office using their prefrontal cortex to define the procedures because I'm Chuck Yeager in the cockpit and I can do it. No. Let's talk about framing. How things are presented to us and how that changes our position on that information. So, I don't know about in Europe. I should know, but I don't. But in this country, I'll use milk. I don't have milk up there, but I'm going to start with milk. When you go to the grocery store in this country and you go buy milk, you can buy whole milk. You can buy 2% milk, 1% milk, and skim milk. Those are your options. And put chocolate in them too if you want, right? Okay. How does 2% milk compare to whole milk with respect to fat content? Has anyone ever thought about it? 3.2 to 2? I don't even know how to answer that. But think about the milk, honestly. How much fat's in it? Just give me a rough estimate. Come on, you got a gun to your head, you got to answer. What's the number? 2%. That's what people think, right? Yeah, that's what everyone thinks. Everyone thinks it's 2%. It's half. Huh, who said that? What? Yeah, what? Here's the fact. Whole milk has 4 to 4.5% milk fat. And actually, it depends upon the cow that it comes from, how much milk fat's in it, believe that or not. Holsteins have higher milk fat than Guernseys, Brown Swiss. They're genetically different. Whole milk has 4%. 2% milk has half the fat of whole milk. Most people think they're really, well, I'm drinking 2% milk. I'm being much healthier. I'm not drinking that whole milk. Yeah, you're drinking half as much fat. Do you think that's an accident that we present it to you that way? Of course it's not an accident. How about ground beef or ground turkey? If you're trying to eat healthy, you're eating ground turkey, not ground beef. Whether that's healthy or not, I don't know. My wife says it is. And in an effort not to get into an argument, I just eat ground turkey, right? You got to choose your battles. I've been married 34 years. If she wants ground turkey it is, right? Who am I to interfere? But do you ever see it advertised as, buy this, it's 20% fat. We have some great ground beef, 20% fat. No, it's 80% lean or 90% lean. That's how it's promoted to us. There's a study done at a major university, and actually it was prostate cancer is what they were, the study was done with men with prostate cancer, which is a pretty sensitive thing, right? And so it was put before the people, the men, listen, you can have this surgery, this procedure, whatever the procedure was. And I just used 80% versus 20 just as a, so the values may be different in each person's case. But basically, one group of physicians were telling men, listen, if we do this procedure and this treatment plan, you have a 70% chance, or in my example, an 80% chance of a successful outcome. And in this group, it was just said the same statistics were true, but we didn't say you had an 80% chance of success. We had said there's a 20% chance it will be a failure. Which group do you think chose that course of action? The people here. Are the odds any different? No different. It's how it's presented to us. That's what's important. Think about, and I don't know in other countries, but here in this country, if you're a pilot here, you've heard the term, back when we called flight service all the time, VFR flight not recommended. VFR flight not recommended. Anytime it was below 3,005, you were told VFR, by the way, 3,005 is 3,000 foot ceiling, 5 mile of viz. I apologize, it's one of the problems we have in aviation, right? We start saying things that we assume everyone knows, but it's a 3,000 foot ceiling and 5 mile of visibility. Anytime it was less than that, I'd hear VFR flight not recommended. Now, how many helicopter pilots will not happily fly in 3005 VFR? Everyone will. So when you hear that, does it just go in one ear and out the other one? Sure it does. I hear that all the time. Right? I hear it all the time. What if instead we said IMC is possible? Maybe likely. I don't know. Would that change people's reception of the message? Probably. Probably. I think probably. And I'm going to give you an example here, but people are much more likely to take a risky choice when they're posed with a loss frame. So we're going to talk about gain frames and loss frames, and then I'll come back. So let's talk about a gain frame for a moment. And I need to change this because we're helicopter people, so $5 isn't even interesting. So let's make it $5,000 because that's the kind of currency you deal in, right? Facetiously. So I'm a very wealthy helicopter pilot, so I've got tons of money. And I walk up to every one of you and I set $5,000 in front of you. $5,000 in cash. It's yours. It's yours. Thank you for attending. Right? But I got a deal for you. I have a coin, and I'm going to flip the coin. If you agree to the deal, I'm going to flip the coin. If it's heads, I'll give you 10 grand. I'll give you an additional $5,000. You following me? But if it's tails, I take my 5 back. Thank you for playing. That was very nice. Now really think about that. I put $5,000 in front of you. It's yours. How many people are going to take the chance of winning, a 50-50 chance of getting 5 more, but a 50-50 chance of having nothing? How many people keep the 5? Yeah, statistically, it'll be 2/3 of you. Statistically, it'll be 2/3. Let's flip it now. What I do instead is, because you're all wealthy aviators, I walk up and you give me $5,000. That's the cost for attending today is $5,000. So you all give me 5 grand. I'm very happy with that. Right? So I have your $5,000. Now I say to you, I have a coin. I'm going to flip it. If you agree, So the 5 grand is mine. You had to pay me. It's mine. Thank you. But I'll give you a deal. I'm going to flip this coin. If it's heads, I give you your 5 grand back. If it's tails, you got to give me another 5. The odds flip, or the odds stay the same. Your response changes. About 2/3 over a large population, right? We're not talking about the 20 people in the room. 2/3 will take the risky choice. They'll say, shit, I don't want to give you 5. I've lost. I'm in a loss frame. In the first event, you're in a gain frame. You've got 5 grand. You didn't do anything for it. You got 5 grand. And if I flip the coin and you lose the 5 grand. You're in a gain frame. You can only, by keeping it, you gain. But in the second example, that's a loss frame. You've lost 5 grand. You'd take the risk of losing 10 before you happily accept losing 5. That's how come Vegas is built, right? Does anyone believe that you can win at Vegas? Are your odds that you're going to win in Vegas, are they in your favor? No. Is there a human being above the age of 10 in this world that doesn't know that? No. People still go, right, and give them their money. Because you are indeed giving them your money. And it's fascinating. People say, yeah, but I win in Vegas. Yeah, today you did. How about the other 18 times you went? Right? I've seen a lot of unhappy people at McCarran. Okay, so I didn't go through the pilot part of that. I'm like, I lost myself. So let's make this aviation related now, because this is where it matters to us. Let's imagine I'm sitting on the ground in Grand Prairie and I've got a flight to go to Butte, Montana. And I'm flying a ship that costs $5,000 an hour to operate. And that's not hard to imagine, right? There's a lot of aircraft out there that cost 5 grand to operate an hour. That's the cost. So I've got a ship that costs 5 grand an hour to operate. I'm sitting at Grand Prairie Airport, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go fly or not, right? I'm checking weather, the MEL on the aircraft, see if there's any equipment that's not working that might be critical to me successfully completing the flight, my health, my alert, all that. I'm making, and I say, you know what? I think I can make it. I think I can make it. After I take off and I fly 30 minutes. So I've blown $2,500 out the exhaust stack, right? And I encounter weather that's a little lower than forecasted. Am I likely to turn around and go back to Grand Prairie and land and say, well, weather's too bad, I couldn't make it? Because if I go back, I flew a half hour out, I got to fly a half hour back. That's $5,000. I just blew out the exhaust stack. Is that a gain frame or a loss frame? That's a loss frame. What do you think most pilots do when they make a decision, they take an action, and they're in a position that is a loss position? Do you think they're more likely to make a hazardous choice from here forward? Sure they are. Contrast that with this. I look at the weather, I look at all the data, and I say, you know what? Odds are I could make it. Odds are I could make it. But you know what? I'm sitting here using my prefrontal cortex, not my amygdala. I'm sitting here using my rational brain, and you know what? If I make it, great, but if I don't make it, I'm going to waste a lot of money, potentially harm myself and others. So the rational thing to do is just not go. And I can make that because I'm in a gain frame. I've got nothing to lose, right? I haven't spent $1. Does that make sense? That's why once pilots take off and they start heading somewhere, the propensity to continue is high. Confirmation bias. If you were in Chappelle, I won't go through all of this because people were in Chappelle's, and quite honestly, what I have to say is very similar, but what I want to talk about is that we look to see what we want to see, in est. Let's imagine I call up weather, and I get one weather report, and the weather looks good. And the PIREP says the weather is good enough to go, right? But the terminal area forecast is for it maybe not to be. Right now it's good to go, and in the time frame I'm going to go, it's going to stay right on the edge of good enough to go. And maybe there's a PIREP out there that says, you know, the weather is below forecast. A pilot report out there says the weather is below forecast. If I want to go, do you think I go? Sure. Because I say, well, the forecast is right above it, and then the time frame I'm going to fly still remains above it, and that PIREP, he probably didn't know what he's talking about, I'm going to go. But if I don't want to go, what am I going to do? If I don't want to go, I'm going to say, oh, there's a PIREP that says I can't go. We look for things that will substantiate what we already believe or what we want to have happen. I pose that I could go to Air Force One or whatever aircraft you deem to be the most airworthy aircraft in the world, the most cloistered, taken care of ship in the world, and I can find something that makes it unairworthy. By the way, that's another topic that I speak about, is the difference between airworthy and safe for flight. A pilot is not responsible to make sure an aircraft is airworthy. That is the owner or operator's responsibility. The pilot's responsibility is to make sure it is safe for flight. And people say, well, that's insane, Bruce. What are you talking about? Okay. Let's say your registration numbers on a helicopter out there are 4 inches tall. 4 inches tall. The old registration numbers. The ship's just been repainted, but they put the old registration size on it. Is that aircraft legally airworthy? No. Is it safe for flight? Sure is. Could a pilot fly it and not get in trouble for flying it? Sure he could. Will the owner-operator get in trouble for giving you an unairworthy aircraft? Yes. There's a difference. A lot of these things we kind of pile on. We think airworthiness and safety of flight is the same thing. It is not. Source credibility. This was a big one I put here, nurse in a thunderstorm, to remind me, because I was saying to some people here, the last time I was at this event was in Vancouver, and I was called away to go to Memphis, Tennessee to a helicopter accident. And in fact, I'm going to Memphis, Tennessee after this on Friday, which is a strange coincidence. But I use this, source credibility. Here's a real world example. I just bought a new iPhone, probably some people in the room have as well. And let's imagine you're going to go buy a new iPhone, and let's just imagine that you know me, and I am a tech guru, and I know it, which is actually the opposite of the truth. But let's just imagine, man, I know everything you know about a phone, and you believe that about me. And you say, Bruce, I'm going to go buy the iPhone. I know, Raphael's like, he doesn't know crap. I'm going to go buy the iPhone XS Max. That's what I bought. And I say, man, don't buy that phone. I bought one. It's a piece of crap. Now, you've done all your research, and maybe Consumer Reports says it's the best phone in the world, and you know everything you've ever read points to that being the best phone in the world. And the unfortunate fact is, I got the only lemon ever made. But if I tell you, and you believe me, don't buy that, it's the junk, you won't buy it. And the reverse is true as well. And I put nurse in a thunderstorm here because there was an unfortunate accident. There were 3 deaths. The accident occurred in a thunderstorm, a level 5 thunderstorm, tops over 50,000 feet, and it was a 350. And you know what? Fighter jets don't fly through that, let alone a 350. And so they were spit out the bottom of the thunderstorm, and it killed everyone on board. And the nurse in the helicopter was on her cell phone talking to the oncoming crew, 1 mile away they were, saying, do you think we're going to make it? The weather's really bad. The woman on the other end heard the last word ever spoken by that woman. They died 1 mile from their destination. And the woman in that helicopter, that nurse, what was she looking for? She was looking for someone to tell her, you're going to make it. The weather here is better. You'll make it. She knew the weather was bad. They all knew the weather was bad. But she was reaching out for someone to tell her, you'll make it, it'll be okay. Many of us, if not all of us, have called people before, even when you had the METAR or the TAF, or the MOS now, right? And said, hey, how's the weather there? You got the METAR, right? And sometimes that's realistic, sometimes it's not. But what are we looking for? We're looking for somebody to tell us what we want to hear. Be careful about that. They may tell you what you want to hear. It just may not be right. We've already talked about this. The cockpit, it's a terrible place to make decisions, a terrible place to make decisions. But that's where we're tasked to make decisions. So I'm near the end, so I apologize. I've run a little bit long here. We're not out of time, but so here's what I believe. Before we depart, to avoid getting into that loss frame, because once you're in the loss frame, I don't care. You've been to this, you've heard this, I think you agree with what I'm saying, but you're still going to choose the more risky option. It's innate in our being. And tomorrow you might not, and the next day you might not, but you know what? 4 months from now you probably still will. Hopefully I can give you some ideas how to prohibit that. But we need to have more of a flight plan in our mind before we go, and it doesn't have to be some formal thing you file with flight service, but you ought to have a plan to meet your destination and then an alternate plan. Hey, if I don't make that, I can divert over here and that place has turbine fuel, or that place, the worst thing is you get in a position where now you have no choice. You've overflown fuel, you've overflown a safe place to land, and now you're forced to either crash or crash. That happens. And if the mission's very important, have a tertiary plan, not just a secondary one, a tertiary one. We were at Texas Motor Speedway. We flew a lot of guests. Maybe some of you were the people that we've flown. But we used to go to the Speedway, and we flew all of our customers into our suite and all of them out. One night, actually it was a night race, we flew, I don't know how many people, I'll say 60 people into the race. So we had 4 helicopters flying, 60 people into the race. While the race is going on, the weather's just deteriorating. There's storms in the area. So I get a hold of our VP of Communications, and I say, hey, Brenda, I don't know that I can get these people out of here. I mean, we've brought them all to the track. They're all having a great time, but in an hour and a half from now, when they all want to go home, I think I may be grounded. I mean, she's like, well, that's going to cost, I don't remember, but I don't care about money. Money, you know what? I'm well past caring about that. So I said, well, you know what? It's really your decision. I'm just letting you know that at the end of the race, if I'm unable to fly, I won't be able to fly. And the time to prepare for that eventuality is now before the race ends, because once the race ends, all the traffic then is one way out, no one in. So they're going to have to wait for all the traffic to clear before the bus could even get here. Okay. So we hired 2 big Greyhound buses. They came in, and we had them all on standby. And so when the race ended, guess what? We flew them all home. That's the price you pay sometimes. If it's important enough, and you want a backup plan, you're going to pay for the backup plan. You can either choose to do it or not, but she knew me well enough to know if I said we weren't flying, we weren't flying. I don't care who's there. I'm not going. Because how absurd is it if someone says, well, Bruce, I got to go. And you wouldn't tell a surgeon, well, surgeon, I understand that brain surgery, you really recommend we don't do it today, but damn it, I got a schedule. No. How absurd is it to tell a pilot, to demand a pilot to fly in weather he says, I can't fly in that. That's not safe. So I haven't made it 54 years to succumbing to that pressure. You just say no. You don't have to do it in a rude way, but no. Yeah, and resist temptation to wing it, right? It'll be fine. We'll do this. It'll all go well. I hope it goes well, right? So let's talk about dispatching. I want to talk about a practical application here, so I'll just go to this screen. When I flew medical helicopters, and perhaps in many fields, many aircraft operations, when they would ask me where I could go, and just imagine this happens to be my base, they would say, hey, Bruce, can you go up to this airport and pick a patient up and take them down to this hospital? That would be the question. Can you go to Oblenus and then go back to Grant Hospital? That'd be the question. And then I'd look at the weather and say, well, yeah, I can or I can't. Whatever the answer is what the answer was, right? But I posed the mere fact that they asked me, can I go here and then here, improves the likelihood that I will say yes, follow me. What if instead what happens is dispatch calls me and says, Bruce, where can you fly? Right now, where can you fly? And I say, well, I can fly in sectors B1, B2, A1, A2. I can't fly in C1, C2, D1, D2, E1, E2, F1, F2. Right? But she wants me to go, or the dispatcher wants me to go from there to there. Can I do it? No. What should the dispatcher's response to me be? Well, thank you. Goodbye. I shouldn't even know where they want me to go. The question shouldn't be to me, can you go from here to here? It should be, where can you go? Then I make that answer completely unbiased. Does that make sense? Truly, if you pose to me the question, can you go here to here? I'm more likely to say yes than if you just ask me point blank, where can I go? Because I don't know where you want to go, so I'm just going to tell you where I can go. It makes a difference. Framing how we present this makes a difference. This is, I think, my last slide, and this is very critical. Let's imagine I'm flying a ship, and it's that first case. I've got this ship, it's $5,000 an hour operating cost. I've taken off, I fly across here, and I get to this frontal boundary, and the weather's bad. Weather's bad. Now, I know I should just turn around or simply land, yes? But that's not what most of us do. And I say us, not you, us. What have we done? What do most of us do in that situation? Well, we come up here and we say, I can't get through there. And that's just to throw a number at it. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, impenetrable, you die in an instant, to 0, it's clear blue and 22. I fly up here and I get there and I say, well, it's about a 7. I can't go through a 7. I need at least a 4. I'm just throwing that out as just a number. Okay. So I'm like, well, I've already blown $5,000 or $2,500 out the exhaust stack. I'm just going to, what do you think most of us are going to do? Or most of us have done. I'm not saying going to do, have done. Well, most of us have in our past said, well, I'm just going to run along that frontal boundary. I'll go to the northeast or to the southwest a bit, depending upon where we're ultimately going. And I'll see if I can't find whatever I just said is good, 4, right? Does anyone think I'm wrong in that assessment? Because I think that's what we do. Okay, so now I'm running along this frontal boundary. I'm running along that frontal boundary, and it's now 30 minutes longer. I'm flying up it, and I keep looking, like, maybe I take a little peek. Oh, now I burned $5,000 out the exhaust stack, and if I go back, that's another 5. Answer this question. If here originally it was a 7, 30 minutes later when I'm down here and it's still a 7, do you think that 7 looks a hell of a lot like a 4? Be honest. Sure does. People do it all the time. They go down it, they go down it, they go down it, and they're like, we're doing it. We're doing it. Horrible. Most people don't survive that. Those that do, if they're emboldened by it, they're going to die soon enough. Unfortunately, in our business, they kill others and they destroy aircraft. But here's the key point for everyone in this room, and I do mean this. It's us. This is, if you remember nothing of this presentation but this, I think this will help us all. If I do this, and I call Christoph's my boss, and I say, Christoph, I made a mistake. I took off in this ship. I've made a precautionary landing at this airport. I made a precautionary landing. The next words out of his mouth will dictate my future behavior. Follow this. Let's imagine what he says is, well, Bruce, nicely, he says, well, Bruce, I appreciate you calling and thank you for landing. But before you landed, did you think about going down here and then coming, because I've done that before. I've gone down here just below this butte, and then there's a valley there you can get through. Or, did you contemplate picking up a clearance and going around here or going over or under? Do you follow me? Do you think he's trying to harm me? He's not trying to harm me. He's trying to help me. He's trying to say his judgment and expertise says there are some other things he could have done, I could have done, right? He's not purposefully harming me. And his message is as pure and helpful as it can be. But what is the reception? Even though I know he's trying to help me, what message is he really sending to me? I didn't do the right thing. I screwed up. And Let me help you do better next time. Try this next time. Do that next time. Right? So what do you think I'm going to do the next time I'm in this situation? I'm going to take Christoph's advice. I'm going to say, well, you know what? I remember I was in this situation earlier. And he said, why don't I try to pick up an IFR clearance or whatever it is. His very well-meaning help is destructive. We have to stop that. Here's what he should say to me, and Christoph would. Here's what he should say to me. Well, Bruce, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry that happened to you. What can I do to help you? Do you need security to watch the helicopter while I get you a Uber to take you to the nearest hotel? I'll get you the nearest hotel. I'll make sure I'll find a hotel for you. I'll get security to watch the aircraft. Do you know what county you're in? Never mind, I'll figure it out. I'll call the local sheriff and tell him what's happened. So there'll be no problem with the authorities, right? What he should do is do nothing but help me, not try to counsel me at that time, not try to redirect me. Now, let's imagine that this is the third time I've done something like this, or even the first time potentially. It's okay for like the next day maybe, or the next week at some point to sit down and say, hey, Bruce, tell me what happened. And then I can explain to him what happened. He'd say, you know what, Bruce, where do you think you made a mistake? And let me sort through it. I'm not dumb. I'll come to the same conclusion he has, but I'll come to it. But that's not our desire is to be helpful. When someone calls us with a problem, women are better women are better at this than men. When a woman comes to you with her problem, she does not want an answer. That's like day 2 of marriage, right? When she's like telling you all that's gone wrong at work, do not resist. Take that amygdala. We need to take them out and throw them away. Don't try to help. Yes, sweetie, I understand. That's too bad. Can I pour you another drink, right? Don't try to help, but that's what we want to do. We're problem solvers. And as executives, as managers and it can be a technician doing the same thing, right? It can be a technician that's made a faux pas or is about to make a faux pas or has decided to, no mas, I have to quit. What you do subsequent to that is going to make a huge impact on what they do next time. Really. Because now you're not concerned about this time. The ship's safe. Everyone's safe. But what will happen next time? So that's all I have. I've talked about all that. I love history. Before we go, and I guess I have kept you 2 minutes after, does anyone recognize this photo? That is the first heavier-than-air aircraft accident, first airplane accident. That is Orville Wright right about here, and laying on the ground right here is Lieutenant Selfridge, killed at what is now Arlington National Cemetery. Yep, I can tell you all about the accident if you're curious over dinner or at the bar. But I think this is true. If you're going to live upon hope, you're going to die awfully hungry. Don't hope for the best. Plan for the best. Plan for the best. We have to stop saying them, they, you. It's not them. It's us. We control the destiny. Use your influence in your little part of the world to improve it. And it'll be better next year. Remember about chewing on the elephant or whatever he said, right? One bite at a time. If you can make your department 1% better this year, that's 1% better. Hang on to it. If you can hang on to it, so be it.